Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight I'll tell you a story rooted in dread and dust and experience. Dr. Elias Monroe would carry forever after arriving in a forgotten desert town to investigate a strange manuscript. Settle in. Let the hum of the wind surround you and find out what waited beneath the soil when the spiral began to turn. I never intended to return to that place. Hell, I never intended to set foot there in the first place. But language has a way of calling us back, not with words, but with something older, heavier. Something buried, something that listens. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the kind you find in libraries or cold rooms or funeral homes, but the kind that feels predatory. The kind that waits outside my motel window. The sky sagged low and gray as if it had been bruised. The air was dry, the kind of dry that cracks lips and minds. A single strip of road carved its way through the ochre desert like a scar, leading into the collapsed heart of a town that should have died 100 years ago but didn't. Sable Rock, population 48, according to the rusted sign twisted sideways at the turnoff. I hadn't meant to be there. The last thing I remembered before waking up in that dust-caked room was boarding a flight out of Seattle. I'd been hired to consult on a Cold War-era cipher unearthed in some military archive in Albuquerque. There had been an invitation, an envelope, a smell like old paper and copper, then nothing. No plane, no car, just here. The bed was too small for a man of my build. The mirror was cracked, and the faucet spat out water the color of old pennies. But it was the hum that unnerved me the most, low, constant, like something deep beneath the floorboards turning slowly. I couldn't tell if it was mechanical or biological, or imagined on the knitstand. A leather-bound book, blank on the outside, filled with tight, elegant handwriting, a language I didn't recognize, a rare thing for a man like me. One word repeated over and over in the margins, circled and underlined in a shaky hand. Ophalim, I said it aloud. Felt my tongue resist it. Some words open doors. They say the desert preserves things, bones, wreckage, secrets. It does not preserve the mind. I step outside just afternoon. The sun was a white wound in the sky. Heat waves shimmered across the road like illusions. And the wind came in short, angry gusts that smelled of rust and something sweeter rot. Maybe something under the sand. The kind of smell you'd remember from childhood only to realize it was never a memory, more like an echo. Sable Rock was mostly abandoned. Main Street had a feed store with windows, bricked up from the inside, a church leaning slightly like a drunk waiting to fall, and a diner that still flickered open in buzzing neon, though no one seemed to eat there. And in the middle of it all, the Blackwell Library, the only place that looked, tended painted shutters, a hand-lettered sign, flowers, real ones planted in cracked terracotta pots, like someone was trying to convince the world that time still passed here. She was waiting for me on the front step. Miriam Blackwell, she said, as if that explained everything. She had a voice like a soul rasping against old wood, wore a long brown coat even though the heat should have killed her, sharp green eyes, smelled faintly of sage. You're late. I wasn't aware I was expected, I said. You are not. She opened the door without another word, and I followed because something in me recognized that voice before my mind did. Inside the library, the air shifted, cooler, thicker. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, old ones, Mostly, some handwritten, some chained. I felt them watching. That's not metaphor. I felt them this town. I started. Doesn't matter. She interrupted. I blinked. What matters is what's under it. That's when I first noticed the symbol, etched into the wooden floor just beneath her feet. A circle with 5 crooked lines radiating outward like fractured sunbeams. At the center, the letter O, stylized like an eye. I've seen this before, I murmured. She tilted her head. Not with your eyes. She handed me a photograph, yellowed and curling at the edges. A family, early 1900s, frontier-type stiff collars, glassy eyes, expressions like carved stone, but my eyes locked on the child in the middle because he looked like me. Not vaguely, not coincidentally, exactly. Same cleft chin, same scar above the eyebrow. A birthmark on the left cheekbone I always told people was a burn from spilled coffee. This is some kind of trick. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. It always starts that way. That night I dreamed of tunnels, not caves tunnels, dug by hand, narrow, suffocating, and something was moving inside them, dragging itself forward, inch by inch, closer. When I woke, my fingernails were caked with dry red clay. The hum had grown louder, and the book on my knitstand now had a second word beneath them. Remember, I spent most of the morning pretending I hadn't seen the photograph. Told myself it was doctored, a coincidence, a cruel joke. But every time I blinked, that boy's face hovered in the dark behind my eyelids, etched with a familiarity that went deeper than recognition. It wasn't just the resemblance, it was the expression, tight-lipped, cautious, like he knew something he didn't dare say aloud. I walked Main Street again, slow this time, dragging my boots through the dust like I was trying to erase my own footprints. Sable Rock was to quiet, not in the peaceful, sleepy way. It was the kind of quiet that felt ... watched. Every boarded-up window seemed to hide an eye. Every crow's call echoed too long. There was a post office, still open, though no mail seemed to arrive. There was a funeral home with a sign that read, "Silent Burials. Ask with respect." And there was a single bar, doors open, shadows distill inside. I step in, hoping for noise, human voices, proof of life. Instead, I found old man Whitaker. He was sitting alone at the bar, drinking something clear and viscous from a mason jar. I remember the jar more than anything else. It was full of tiny air bubbles that didn't move, like the liquid inside refused to obey the laws of physics. "You're the word man," he croaked, without turning around. That's one way to put it. He gestured to the seat beside him. I didn't want to sit, but I did. "You've already heard it, haven't you?" I frowned. "Heard what?" He smiled, revealing teeth that looked more like thin, wet stones. The hum beneath the floor, in the spine, in the bone. He tapped his own sternum with one yellow fingernail. I didn't respond, but my stomach twisted. They used to call it the prayer engine, long time back. He continued. Thought it was God speaking through the earth. Then the settlers came, gave it a new name. What name? He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something break through the cataracts clouding his gaze. Something afraid. They didn't give it a name. They gave it a mouth. Back outside, the sun had dropped behind the hills, turning the sky into blood pudding. That's the best way I can describe it. Thick, red, and wrong. The clouds moved against the wind. I took the long way back to the motel, avoiding the church even though it was on the shortest path. I didn't want to see it again, the way the steeple bent away from the sky like it was ashamed, the way the air smelled thicker near it, the way the windows seemed to ripple. As I passed the old water tower, I heard a creak. Wood or something pretending to be wood. I turned there. For just a heartbeat, I saw someone or something standing in the doorway of an abandoned house. Too tall, no face, just presence. I blinked, gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Heat mirage, my mind catalogued it like any anomaly filed, labeled, dismissed. But when I got back to my room, the book had changed again. Now, on the inside of the back cover, scrawled in my own handwriting, "She is not Miriam." That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted, fell into another one of those dreams, not the tunnel this time, but the library. Only the books were alive, breathing, whispering in a language that tickled my memory, but refused translation. In the center of the room, Miriam stood naked and covered in writing, black ink symbols swirling across her skin, constantly shifting. Her eyes were open, but her mouth moved like someone else was speaking through her. I tried to scream, but something filled my throat. When I woke up, my hands were covered in ink. The book was gone, and the hum had begun pulsing, like it had a heartbeat. I tore the motel apart looking for the book, flipped the mattress, yanked the drawers from their tracks, ripped the frame from the wall, checked behind the mirror. Nothing, no trace of it except for a faint ring of dust on the nightstand, like it had evaporated in the heat, or like it had never been there at all. The hum hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown more rhythmic, pulsing, not in my ears, exactly beneath them, inside the pressure behind my eyes, inside my spine. I went back to the library. The door was already open inside. It smelled different, less like old paper, more like wet iron, something metallic and fungal. A basement smell. Miriam stood in the center of the room, holding the book, my book. The ink on her fingertips was fresh. "You left it behind," she said, like I was the one who'd gone missing. "I didn't write that last message," I said. Her smile didn't waver. "Does it matter?" She handed it to me. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to. The cover felt warmer than it should have, and when I flipped to the last page, the ink was still drying. Not one sentence. This time, a map, not of the town, not of anything I recognized, just a shape, circular, spiraling inward, with 6 branching limbs and a dot at the center. The caption beneath it read, "The shape beneath." I looked up. Miriam was watching me like a teacher waiting for a child to sound out a difficult word. "You know what it is," she said. "You've seen it before." "No." "Yes," she interrupted. "In the glyphs, in the photographs, in the scar on your side." My blood turned to gravel, because I do have a scar on my side, a spiral, thin and pale, that no surgeon ever explained. I got it during a hiking trip in college. Woke up one morning on a rocky hill in Utah with a fever and the mark. Doctors assumed infection or reaction to something in the desert. I believed them. "Until now, show me," I whispered. She didn't ask what. She turned and walked into the back of the library, down a hallway that hadn't been there before. I followed. We descended. The steps behind the shelves wound down for far too long. The light shifted the deeper we went from incandescent to candlelight to something that didn't have a source. The walls were stone, then bone, then both at the bottom, a room circular, like a cistern or catacomb, and in the center of it, on the floor, the same shape from the book carved deep into the stone, but this one moved. The lines trembled. The dot in the center pulsed. Mineshaft? I asked, already knowing it wasn't. She shook her head. Older than mines, older than this town. I crouched to touch the edge of the carving, and screamed, because the instant my fingers grazed the stone, I heard it. Not sound language, 1,000 voices chanting in perfect unison. Not words I recognized, but somehow I knew what they meant. Return what was taken. I fell back, gasping, clawing at my ears even though there was no sound, just the memory of it. Miriam knelt beside me. Calm as prayer. You opened it, she said. I looked at the shape again, and I swear it had grown, or maybe the room had shrunk. Either way, something had changed. Later, back in my motel, I found something under the bed, a pendant, metal, crude, with the spiral symbol scratched into one side, and that word again on the other. Ophalim. It hadn't been there before, but now it belonged. I picked it up and felt an electric shiver pass through my teeth. The world tilted slightly. My fingertips went numb. Then I heard a whisper, a child's voice, from under the bed. You took it from me. When I looked, there was nothing there, but the pendant was warm in my palm. And I knew I remembered this wasn't the first time I'd held it. I didn't sleep, not because I didn't want to, not because I was afraid, because I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I didn't dream. I translated, not in the conscious way I was trained to. This wasn't cognition, it was compulsion, as if the pendant tucked under my pillow kept whispering through my molars in cadences I hadn't heard since I was a child, and maybe even then only in fever. By sunrise, I had covered the motel mirror with a towel. I wasn't ready to see myself. I returned to the library. The hallway behind the shelves was gone. Miriam was waiting by the front window, her hands folded neatly. You broke the seal, she said without turning. What does it want? She tilted her head just slightly, as if I'd asked whether the wind wanted something it doesn't want. It waits, it listens, and when the time is right, it remembers. She stepped toward me. Her eyes were bloodshot, pupils pinpricks. Tell me what it said to you. I hesitated. She moved faster than I expected, grabbed my hand and turned it palm up. The spiral was carved there now, faint but visible, not a scar fresh, like someone had branded it in my sleep. She exhaled, her breath smelling of sage and something coppery. It's speaking through you already. I walked the perimeter of the town just after noon, pendant in pocket, notebook in hand, trying to sort the signals from the static. A pattern was forming. The hum was stronger near certain spots. The church, the library, the funeral home, and a derelict barn just past the dry creek bed. Each place old, wooden, barely standing, was marked with the same sigil in faded paint or scratched boards. I sketched the spiral repeatedly in my notes, but it kept changing every time I drew it. It warped, bent inward, split, spawned offshoots. Language doesn't usually mutate this way unless it's alive. At the barn, I found the first hole, perfectly circular, about 6 feet across. No debris around it. The dirt wasn't dug, it was peeled, like something had pushed upward, then slid back down. The edges were dry and cracked. but the air above it was cold. I tossed a rock in. No sound. I leaned closer and heard a low whisper not in my ears. In my teeth, you wrote it before you were born. I stumbled back. Behind me, the wind picked up, carrying sand in heavy, angry waves. The hum became a chord vibrating through my bones. The pendant grew hot. And then I saw her, Sam Ray's, the journalist. She was watching from the ridge above the barn, camera around her neck, eyebrows furrowed. You're hearing it too, aren't you? She called down. I didn't answer. She slid down the slope in worn boots and stopped beside me. I thought it was just me, she said. That sound, that pull, I got here 3 days ago and haven't been able to sleep since. Keeps calling me to these damn holes. She looked at me, studied my face like I was a page she hadn't decided how to read. What do you think it is? I gave the only honest answer I could. I think it's older than language. That night I dreamt again. The second nightmare, not tunnels this time. Not the whispering books. This one was a prairie burnt flat. Charred fence posts as far as the eye could see in the distance. A procession of faceless figures walking in slow, silent unison, carrying something between them. A bundle, human shape, wrapped in animal skins stitched with bones. They passed me without looking. All but one, a child with my face. He turned, pointed at the sky, and opened his mouth. Inside the spiral, I woke, gasping. The pendant now hung from my neck. I hadn't put it there, and my hands were covered in red clay. Again, morning brought no peace. The motel room stank of dust and sweat and something subtler, sweet and rotting, like spoiled fruit beneath floorboards. The air had thickened overnight. Everything was the kind of quiet that crushed eardrums from the inside. I opened the window and immediately gagged. Smoke, a line of it on the horizon, thin and oily, east of town. I knew exactly where it was coming from. The barn, or what used to be the barn, by the time I arrived. It had collapsed in on itself, charred and still smoking. The hole was gone, caved in or swallowed, I couldn't tell. Sheriff Tom Granger stood at the edge of the ash pit, arms folded across his chest, chewing the inside of his cheek. You seen this before? He asked, not looking at me. No, I said, but I heard it. He turned slowly, eyes to calm. Skin weathered like sunburnt leather. You know what's underneath all this, Dr. Monroe? I think I'm starting to. He stepped toward me. His badge caught the light like a blade. Let me give you some advice. Whatever you think you're finding, stop looking. You don't want the truth. I asked. He smirked. The truth's been here longer than both of us. It doesn't need finding. It's waiting. Then he walked away, slow and heavy, leaving boot prints in the soot. Back in the library, I found Sam digging through a box of microfiche and hand-drawn maps from the 1930s. Her face was lit by the faint green glow of an old screen. She barely looked up. You see it, don't you? She asked. See what? She slid a brittle map across the table. Frontieria, surveyor's aim. A grid of the town and surrounding ranchland, annotated with water wells, abandoned mine shafts, livestock paths. But something was off. There, she said, tapping the center. A burned patch, circular, black out intentionally. The paper round it was crisp. Only that circle had been scorched. No record of what was there, no label, no deed, no owner. She looked up. It's the exact same spot as the barn. I felt the pulse in my temple throb. I flipped the map over. On the back, in faint pencil, beneath the black sun, the voice returns. That night the third visitor came. A knock on the motel door, 3 taps, then silence. I opened it, no one there, just a paper folded neatly on the ground. Old, fragile, a page torn from a book or a journal. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. At the top, a crude drawing of the spiral. Below it, a list of dates, one of them circled in red. My birthday at the bottom. The spiral turns whether you follow it or not. Later, I stood outside in the middle of the street, staring at the stars. Except there were fewer now, the sky had started to rot. The constellations flickered, warped, or disappeared entirely. And when I closed my eyes, I saw a shape just beyond vision. Not a being, not quite, but a structure of thought so large, so old it had forgotten it was once alive, and now it remembered. The archives were kept in the basement of the town hall, though hall was a generous term. The building looked like it had been dragged out of the 1880s and abandoned halfway through renovation. Walls warped, floorboards buckled, ceiling tiles peeled like old scabs. Sam met me there just after dawn. She looked worse than I felt, pale, hollow-eyed, hands shaking as she lit a cigarette with a match that wouldn't catch. Had the dream again, she said. The prairie, I asked. She nodded. This time there were names carved into the fence posts. Whose? She took a long brag, then dropped a match and a puddle of something that probably wasn't water. Mine, yours, Miriam's, half the people I've met here. We didn't speak after that. We just descended. The records were stacked like corpses, leather-bound, logs, tax receipts, birth certificates, handwritten letters from the Dust Bowl years, clippings from a time when the town had electricity, but no reason to use it. Sam and I combed through the 1930s ledgers first, then the 70s, then the fragile, parchment-thin pages from the 1880s back when this place was first called something else. Not Sable Rock, Offal's Rest. I froze. That name, it wasn't just familiar, it vibrated. I pulled a folder marked exemptions. Land use minus 1,885. Inside, a sketch, crude, ink and charcoal, a surveyor's rendering of the land before the town existed. At its center, not a barn, not a church cavity, marked only with a symbol, the spiral, and beneath it, handwritten in trembling script, Offal's mouth must never open. Sam leaned over my shoulder. Awful, that's the word from the book, isn't it? Ophalim, I said quietly. She traced the sketch with one finger. I think that's a corruption, like a slurred prayer. Language doesn't stay clean forever, especially not when it's trying to name something that doesn't want to be named. I took the sketch to Miriam. She barely glanced at it. It's not a map, she said. It's a lock. What does it seal? She ran her hand along the edge of a bookcase and whispered language. I waited, my breath caught in my throat. The settlers, she said, didn't just build on cursed land. They didn't just run off whatever was here before. They used words the earth itself would choke on, words that rewrite the memory of land. And now it's remembering, I said. She didn't deny it. She just reached behind a row of dusty hymnals and pulled out a thin, wrapped parcel. Inside, a diary, the diary of Elijah Kane, foreman of the Western Survey, 1885. The handwriting was spidery, ragged. May 17th. They warned us not to dig near the hollow place. Said the wind would come through too hot and too fast. We laughed at them. Now half the men can't sleep without screaming. June 3rd. Found stone with no seam or fracture. It sings when touched, not by ear, by blood. I will not touch it again. June 21st. We sealed it with salt and ash, and with word. The word must not be spoken, not by tongue or by pen. June 30th. We buried the name, but it still dreams. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I kept whispering the word to myself. OPHE, acute limit, ... again and again. Like it was drilling back into me, the hum returned, sharper now. It carried something like breath, and when I looked in the mirror briefly, before jerking the towel back down, I saw something move behind my reflection. A figure, watching, smiling, wearing my face. I didn't leave the motel room for 2 days. I couldn't, not because of fear, not exactly. It was like a molar ache in the soul, a pressure that built behind the eyes and throbbed when I moved too far from the spiral. I'd taped pages from the diary to the walls, photocopies, sketches, maps, words, like if I surrounded myself with enough language, it might push the silence back. It didn't. The silence came with me. It sat in the corners. It pressed into my chest when I inhaled. It curled beneath the mattress and whispered not yet when I tried to sleep. Sam was the one who pulled me back. She pounded on the door until my body remembered what urgency felt like. "Wake up, Monroe," she shouted. "We found the masks." I opened the door and the light nearly blinded me. I hadn't realized how dark the room had become. She handed me a plastic shopping bag. Inside, photographs, dusty, curled, matte black and white. They showed a gathering, old, likely 1930s, though it could have been earlier. Men and women standing around a stone circle, not posing, waiting, and every single one of them wore a crude wooden mask carved with the spiral. No record of this in any town archive, Sam said, but Whitaker had them. Said they were passed down. I sat on the bed, photo in hand, trying to ignore the burning behind my eyes. "Why masks?" I asked, mostly to myself. "Eyes," she said. Maybe they thought if it couldn't see their faces, it couldn't take them. We went to see Whitaker. ... He lived in a trailer half sunk into a gulch outside town, surrounded by rusted machinery and animal bones, too clean to be scavenged. He didn't open the door when we knocked. We found him inside, or what was left. It wasn't blood exactly. It was ink, black fluid, viscous, soaked into the rug like a spreading sentence. He was slumped in the corner, eyes wide open, mouth full of the same thick substance. A spiral was burned into the wall above his head, written in charcoal, just 6 words. I wore the mask too late. The sheriff called it suicide. He barely looked at the scene, but I caught him glancing at the spiral more than once, and his jaw twitched each time like he was biting down on something sharp. "Masks," I said to him, "mean anything to you?" He lit a cigarette. "My grandfather wore one," he said. "Said it kept the dreams out." "Did it?" The sheriff didn't answer. He just turned, climbed into his cruiser, and drove off. That night I didn't sleep. I watched the mirror, waited for the reflection to move again. It didn't, but the humming came back stronger. I could hear it through the walls. beneath the floorboards, inside the power outlets. It wasn't sound anymore. It was intent. It was awareness. And around 3 a.m., my phone lit up on its own. A message appeared on the screen. No sender, just 2 words, dig deeper. Sam and I stood at the side of the burned barn at dawn. The ash had cooled, the wind was still, the air felt suspended, like the desert was holding its breath. We started digging, no shovels, just hands. Red earth gave way too easily. Within minutes, we found stone. Smooth, cold, carved, the spiral, but deeper than the carving below it we found something else. A mask, old, petrified wood, cracked through the center. The spiral wasn't carved this time. It was grown, as if the grain of the wood had formed it naturally. Sam reached for it. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't," I said, but I was too late. She touched it and screamed. Not in pain, in recognition. "I remember this place," she said, voice hollow. Eyes not hers, but I wasn't born here. Sam didn't speak for hours after she touched the mask. She sat in the dirt, hands slack in her lap, staring at the horizon like she was waiting for it to blink. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And every few minutes, she'd whisper that word again. "Ophalim," only now she said it differently, with reverence, like it wasn't a curse anymore, but a key. I wrapped the mask in my jacket and buried it under the passenger seat of my truck. I didn't want it near her or me. It radiated cold, not temperature, absence. At sunset, I returned to the church. I'd avoided it for days, even when it stood in my peripheral vision like a guilt I hadn't earned. It leaned sideways, as if the land itself had grown tired of holding it up. The steeple pointed not to heaven, but to something beneath, inside, mildew and silence. Pews warped and split, hymnals rotted in stacks. The air stank of dried flowers and damp paper. The floor creaked beneath my boots, and with each step the hum grew louder. At the pulpit, I found a trapdoor under a rusted rug. It wasn't locked. I descended alone. The cellar wasn't a cellar. It was a chamber, stone walls, packed earth floor. Candles melted into piles decades ago. At the far end, beneath a shroud of cobwebs and burlap, lay a box the size of a coffin. Inside, a ledger, bound in hide, thick, heavy with dirt and dread. I lifted it gently. The first page wasn't English. It was in a pictographic language I recognized from a single anthropology textbook, and to weeks I spent consulting with a tribal elder in New Mexico. This was Garizan Tewa, northern Pueblo. Impossible, no record of these people ever living this far south. But the ledger told a different story, written not in a single hand, but many generations. The first entry was a warning. The mouth of the forgotten one lies beneath the red land. It was here before we were dust. We built no fire above it. We fed it no name. Page after page, detail, offerings of song, of silence, of stone, not to appease, but to distract, to give the thing below just enough to keep it sleeping. Then came the invaders, and the writing changed. The iron voices came. They brought their own tongue. They gave it shape. They broke the circle and called the name aloud. The soul recoiled. The next page was smeared, burned. But I could make out one phrase, repeated like a prayer or a plea. Do not teach it your language. I copied as much as I could into my notebook and fled the church just before nightfall. The shadows were longer than they should have been, and the birds that circled the steeple moved like they'd been stitched into the sky with trembling hands. Back at the motel, Sam hadn't moved. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor now, speaking in a low hum. It wasn't speech, not quite, more like phonemes root sounds from old tongues. She didn't look up when I entered, just kept whispering. I sat beside her and opened the ledger copy on my lap, and something happened. The words started to shift. Not on the page in my head, where before I'd needed dictionaries and references and caution. Now I just understood, as if the language had been waiting for me to remember it, or worse, as if it had been teaching me while I slept. At midnight, she finally looked at me. Her pupils were blown wide, and she said, "It remembers us because we named it, and now it wants its name back. The spiral doesn't start from the center. It begins at the edge with a step, a glance, a word spoken without knowing its cost. That's how it gets in through language, through belief, through the idea of a name. And once you speak that name, once you understand it, it speaks back." I didn't sleep that night. I sat across from Sam as she dozed upright in the motel chair, her mouth moving with silent syllables that didn't belong to her. And I read, not the ledger, my own journals, years' worth, notes from jobs, scribbles on plane tickets, scribbled translations. I was looking for something I didn't know how to define, a thread, and I found it. 3 years ago, a dig site in Utah, a pictograph, a spiral. 7 years ago, a military document from an underground facility in Nevada. Censored names, coordinates, linguistic drift, anomaly, and subject awful 9. 12 years ago, an academic conference in Norway, a fellow linguist presenting on non-human grammar structures found in petroglyphs. I hadn't thought of it since, all connected. And there at the very back of my notebook, scrawled in faint pencil, "You've been here before," written in my own hand, but shakier, older. I stood in the motel bathroom, brushing dust off my sleeves, when I noticed something new in the mirror, not movement, a reflection, faint, etched behind my eyes, the mark, the spiral. It wasn't on my skin, not exactly, it was in my expression. Every time I blinked, it grew clearer. It had nothing to do with flesh. This thing had left a signature in my perception. I stared until the room tilted, until my vision blurred, until I thought I saw someone behind my reflection again. Not a figure, a version, me, but changed, smiling, like it knew something I didn't. I needed answers, more than the ledger, more than Sam. I went to see Miriam. The library was closed, shades drawn, the windows dark. I pounded on the door until the silence broke. She opened it slowly, but it wasn't the same Miriam. Her hair was wet, her clothes smelled like old clay, and her eyes, green as ever now, carried a dimness I hadn't seen before, as if the soul behind them had stepped back to let something else lean in. "You remember now," she said softly. "I'm starting to. Then you know this isn't your first time." I nodded. "How many?" She stepped aside, gesturing toward a wall of books, one shelf in particular, journals, dozens of them, each spine labeled the same, he, Monroe. "Every cycle, you come back, the spiral calls. You follow, you record, you forget. I ran my fingers along the spine's 42 volumes, each one worn, annotated my handwriting, my thoughts, but none of them ended. Not a single volume had a final page. What happens at the end? I asked. She smiled, and this time it was pity, not menace. You are the end. Outside, the town had grown to quiet again, but not empty. People walked the streets now, slowly, like sleepwalkers, faces blank, eyes unfocused, moving toward something. The spiral wasn't just in me, it was in them. Sable Rock was remembering, and I was the thing it remembered most clearly. I returned to the motel, shaking. Sam hadn't moved. Her eyes were closed, but she was humming now deep, resonant, catching the pulse in the air. The pendant was gone from my neck. It sat on the knit-stand, spinning, spinning, spinning. Then she opened her eyes, and in a voice not entirely hers, she said, "You wrote the first name, you broke the first silence, and now you must write the last." I didn't ask Sam what she meant, not right away, because the moment she said those words, "write the last name," something in my body reacted, like an allergy, like trauma. My knees buckled. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack a tooth. My mind knew, even if my memory hadn't caught up yet. I stumbled into the bathroom. Splashing cold water didn't help. The spiral was in my reflection again, clear now, burned into the air around my head like a crown. Sam was still sitting, still humming, and the pendant, it had stopped spinning. Now it pulsed. I drove out past the last road sign at noon, when the sun was highest and the wind didn't dare blow. My hands shook on the wheel the whole time. I wasn't sure where I was going until I saw it. The dried creek bed, where the map had been burned, where the first barn once stood before time looped and memory forgot. I walked 50 yards to the red dust and found what I knew I would. The stones arranged in a spiral, half buried. I crouched and touched the center and fell through myself. It wasn't a vision, not a dream, a memory, but it wasn't in my voice. Not quite a young man me, but not me stood at the edge of a clearing. He held a stone etched with an unfinished glyph. Behind him, settlers, surveyors, missionaries, men with guns and picks and Bibles. Ahead of him, a circle of elders, eyes hollow with knowing. A standoff without weapons. The young man spoke. I didn't understand the words not then, but I felt them, words of invitation, an attempt at order, a naming. We call this place Awful's Rest. We mark it for the map. We seal it with tongue and treaty. The elders begged him not to speak it, to let it remain uncalled, to leave the thing beneath unnamed, because it only listened to language. But I did it anyway, not out of arrogance, out of curiosity. And with that single phrase, with that naming, the spiral opened. I came to on my back, covered in red clay. The sun had moved, the shadows were longer. I'd been gone for hours. The spiral stones around me were gone. Only my footprints remained, but etched into the dirt where I'd lain. You gave it form, now give it rest. Back in town, the sky was wrong. The clouds spun counterclockwise, low and fast, like someone had pressed rewind on the weather. People walked slowly in the street, mouths open, whispering syllables I now recognized, fragments of ancient tongues, broken phonemes from a word that shouldn't exist. I returned to Miriam, found her lighting candles in the basement of the library. "The spiral's opened again," I said. She nodded. "It opens every time you remember, but this time—" She paused, eyes glinting in the candlelight. "You're closer to the center." I sat across from her. "I need to know what the name means. The real one." She unwrapped a bundle of cloth. Inside, a single page of vellum, ancient, faded, written in that same hybrid language, a puzzle of indigenous glyphs and corrupted Latin. I stared at it, and the moment my eyes traced the spiral drawn on the page, I understood it was never a name. Not for a thing, it was a name for a door. Ophilim wasn't what was buried, it was how we opened it. "You can't kill it," Miriam said. "I know, but you can silence it." I nodded. "Not with fire, not with stone, with the only thing it fears." I looked up. "And language. Language has weight. It shapes. It binds. It defines." But what I needed now was the opposite of that. Not words, anti-words, not meaning, the collapse of meaning. If Ophilim was a name that opened the door, I needed a new kind of name, one that would unmake it, an unlanguage, something that couldn't be spoken, couldn't be written, something that would exist only in the negative space between what could be named. Sam didn't argue when I told her. She nodded, still pale, still distant, like half her soul had never come back from the mass. "I've been hearing the shapes," she said, "like reverse echoes, sounds that disappear the moment I think about them. Can you write them?" She shook her head. "Not with symbols, not with ink, only with absence." She drew her hand across the air, left nothing, and that nothing vibrated. We began with reversal, taking the earliest glyphs from the ledger and flipping them phonetically, visually, structurally. We created glyphs with no symmetry, no echo, no anchor, words that stuttered as you read them, phonemes that refused to settle in the throat. Each night I dreamed of falling into a mouth that never closed, and each morning I woke with new symbols scratched into my notebook, though I hadn't written them. They were mine, but they were older than me. "Miriam found us on the third night. You're running out of time," she said. I looked up from the table, pages scattered, symbols bleeding off the margins. "I'm close." She nodded toward the town square. "They're gathering." I followed her outside. The convergence had begun. Dozens of townspeople stood in perfect silence, forming a spiral. Not walking, standing. Some held candles, others held bones. Their mouths moved without sound. Their shadows flickered, even though the flames didn't. The sky above them was a single, rotting, bruised purple and swollen with clouds that didn't belong. And in the center of the spiral stood Sheriff Granger. He looked right at me and smiled, the same smile from the mirror, the same smile from the bow in the photo. He raised one hand and pointed to his chest, etched into his skin the spiral. But his was finished, perfect, complete. "It's choosing a voice," Miriam said beside me. "What? It's not just memory anymore. It's becoming present. It wants a speaker, a mouth." I felt my jaw clench, because I knew what she wasn't saying. It had always been me. That night, I wrote the first line of the unlanguage, not with ink, with silence. I tore the page from my notebook, held it to a candle, and let it burn. The flames danced wrong, but when they were gone, when the ashes curled, I felt it. The hum stuttered. For the first time, the spiral flinched. Sam and I stood on the roof of the library at dawn. The townspeople were still below, unmoving. A chorus of stillness, a pressure in the air. "This will break you," she said, "I know, and me." I didn't respond because she was right. To speak in language is to surrender the logic that holds the mind together, to turn the act of naming into an act of erasure. But I had one advantage. I'd already done it before. That night I opened the last journal Miriam gave me. It was my handwriting, but it wasn't a record. It was an instruction, and the final page held a single phrase. Speak backwards, unwrite the first word. There was no sunrise, just a slow graying of the sky, like something above the clouds had turned to ash and was falling, grain by grain, over sable rock. The light didn't change, it just died. The townspeople hadn't moved, still spiraled in the square, still whispering without breath. Sam and I watched them from the roof of the library. "They're not people anymore," she said. "They never were," I replied, not because I believed it, but because I finally understood something deeper. They were echoes, remnants of every past convergence, silhouettes burned into the fabric of this place like radiation scars, and I was the anchor. I'd been here before, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally dot each time the spiral opened. I returned drawn by a language I once helped give birth to, a name I spoke into the earth like a wound. Each time I tried to undo it, each time I failed. But not this time. This time I brought silence. I stood at the center of the spiral at dusk. The townspeople made way without blinking, without speaking. Even Granger stepped aside, eyes dull as wet stone. I carried nothing with me, no paper, no book, no artifact. Just the words that weren't words, the syntax of undoing. Sam stood at the edge of the formation. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just mouthed one thing. Finish it. The hum began as I stepped into the circle. Low and bearable, my bones shook, my vision rippled. The spiral beneath my feet wasn't just carved into the stone, it was alive, crawling in and out of itself, expanding with breath that didn't come from lungs. It watched me, it remembered me, and when I reached the center, I spoke the first phrase, a wordless rupture, a cough in the logic of language. A flaw of the spiral recoiled, the hum fractured, time bent seconds doubled back on themselves. I saw stars blink out and reappear, out of order. I saw past versions of myself, flickering at the edge of memory, one digging, one screaming, one with eyes like mine, mouth sewn shut. Then I spoke again, a sentence made of silence, a reversal of everything that came before it, a grammar designed to erode ... and the spiral screamed, not audibly, not in any human sense. But the wind screamed, the sky screamed, the town buckled. Windows shattered without shattering, the church tower collapsed without falling. The people didn't fall, but they peeled, like layers of dust blowing away from something truer beneath. Even Granger fell to his knees, blood pouring from his ears. "You cannot unname the earth," a voice said from everywhere and nowhere, and I reply, "But I can forget it." The final line was a phrase I didn't know I knew, a thought older than thought. It had no shape. It only ended, and when I spoke it, the spiral split. The symbol beneath me cracked in half, not just the carving, the idea, like someone had folded a word until it tore. And all at once the hum stopped, no sound, no light, no spiral. I woke in a field of red dust. Alone, the town was gone, not destroyed, unwritten. I stood slowly, the sky clear above me, unbruised, no structures, no road, no spiral. Just a single notebook in the dirt. I picked it up. No name on the cover. No spiral on the page. Just blank paper. Except for one line in my own hand. If you find this, don't remember. I didn't remember my name when I woke the second time. Not in the dramatic, cinematic sense. I remembered how to form a sentence. I knew what dust was. I could still recognize the feel of sun on skin, the ache of thirst, the structure of grammar. But my own name gone, I was no longer the shape it once filled. I wondered. There was no town anymore, just hardpan and silence. No roads, no foundations, no graves, and no Sam. Only the notebook remained its pages blank except for the single line I must have written before the spiral broke. If you find this, don't remember, but I did. Fragments, backwards dreams, reverse whispers, faces melting into symbols. The feel of the pendant against my skin, heavy as regret, and a doorknob, not a door in absence, framed like one, pulsing beneath my feet wherever I walked. The language had done more than collapse the convergence. It had turned memory itself against me. I was the cost. Days passed, maybe weeks. I emerged onto a highway at dusk. An 18-wheeler slowed as I staggered across the blacktop, half mad, mouth dry, eyes full of dust and forgotten things. The driver took me to the nearest hospital. They asked my name. I told them the first thing that came to mind. Elias, it felt like a lie. It tasted like rust. They kept me under psychiatric observation for 10 days. I was polite, cooperative, said all the right things, said nothing about spirals or masks or names that never should have been spoken. I knew better now. Words had weight. Names were keys, and silence was a lock. I was discharged with a diagnosis of dissociative fugue and trauma-induced amnesia. They gave me a toothbrush, a voucher, and a warning not to stress myself with memories I couldn't verify. I laughed at that. They thought they were helping, but they didn't know what memory was. I rented a room in a city I didn't recognize, took a new job under a new name, taught linguistics at a community college, and spoke carefully, never casually. I smiled when I had to, ate when I could, and kept the notebook locked in a drawer. Most days I didn't open it, but sometimes when the wind moved wrong or the lights dimmed a half second too slow, I'd find myself turning the key and staring at the page. If you find this, don't remember. Then one morning I found something new. The second page was no longer blank. A phrase had appeared in my handwriting, jagged, uncertain, like someone trying to remember how to draw a sound. It's happening again, not here, but somewhere. Underneath it, a hand-drawn spiral, incomplete, open-ended, waiting. You don't notice the cracks at first. They come slow, quiet, polite. A phrase you've never heard whispered in a crowd that shouldn't know your name. A child drawing a spiral in the dirt, humming a tune that makes the birds fall silent. Static on the radio resolving into syllables that don't belong to any living language. You tell yourself it's just coincidence, but coincidence is what the spiral wears to sneak back into your life. It started in the classroom. A student in the back row raised her hand, asked about glossolalia, speaking in tongues, wanted to know if ancient languages could possess the living. I gave the textbook answer. Language is a construct. It has no will. She tilted her head and said, But what if it remembers? My mouth went dry. The notebook had changed again. The third page was no longer blank, just for words spaced perfectly. Don't teach the children. And below it, a new spiral, tighter this time, drawn in red ink. That night I dreamed of Sam for the first time since the spiral broke. She was standing in the center of a train station, surrounded by people walking backward in perfect silence. She wore no mask this time, just a smile and the pendant. She mouthed something. I didn't hear it. But when I woke, the words were scratched into my wall. It moved. Somewhere, far from Sable Rock, a child speaks in a voice not their own. A man wakes with dust beneath his fingernails, and a language in his throat he's never learned. A survey team finds a stone circle in the tundra perfectly carved, ancient, and humming. The spiral never ends, it only spirals. I've begun writing again, not in any known tongue, not even in a language. Something in between, a new grammar. A warning no one will understand, but someone must remember. Because the door wasn't destroyed, only renamed.